I'm sitting in a computer lab in uniform in my final months of the Air Force applying for the Peace Corps. And halfway through that application process, a big blue screen pops up that says, hey, based on your answers, you may be qualified for other lines of work in the federal government. Are you willing to put your application on hold for 72 hours so that a recruiter can contact you? I'm 27 years old. I'm single. I'm leaving the Air Force. I mean, my head is full of dreams. So of course, I'm like, yes, I will pause my application for 72 hours so that your recruiter can call me.
Sure.
And then 24 hours later, I get a call from area code 703. I didn't know what that meant at the time. Mm-hmm. That's the Langley, Virginia area code.
Yeah.
And on the other end of the line is a woman who gives me a first name. And she tells me that I might qualify for a role in national security after she verifies that I am the same person that was online with the Peace Corps. And if I'm open to it, she would overnight me airplane tickets, reservations, and a car rental plan. And I was like, sure. Like
these people are serious.
Well, yeah. Or this is a crank call and I'll know in 24 hours.
Sure.
Right? Because nothing's going to show up overnight. But then something did show up overnight. And then I went to the airport and it was a valid ticket. And then I got to the airport and there was a valid car rental. And then I got to the hotel and it was a real hotel room. And I was like, this is interesting. And then I went to that first interview.
Put a hood over your head and it was a valid hood over your head. Drug you off into interview.
Exactly. But that was, so my path very much came in. I was trying to get into something else. And I was rerouted. And there's a number of us that are rerouted, right? Some people are trying to go to Health and Human Services. Some people are trying to go into NSA. Some people are trying to go into FBI. And our applications get rerouted because all the government agencies all share. And when you're coming from the military especially, or when you're like me coming from the military, they've had my entire life recorded, right? I went to a military college. I had to give that military college all of my medical records from before. Like they knew me. They knew me inside and out. They knew everything that I had been through. They knew my educational record. They knew what languages I spoke. They knew my physical fitness level. I was not a surprise. But then there's always that person who gets into the agency from some way that you would have never imagined. Somebody who used to sell flashlights and they came across somebody in a coffee shop and that person in the coffee shop was like, hey, here's my card. Call me when you can. And that becomes a nomination for CIA position. So people come in from all over the place.
Did you do the job you were recruited to do? Did you do something else? What job did you end up doing?
So one of the things that's really interesting is CIA doesn't actually recruit you to do a job. Okay. They recruit you according to a set of standards that fit you into different classifications, right? Technical officer, analytical officer, clandestine officer, et cetera. So they have a rough idea of what you might fit into as a category. But then you go through a personality battery, you go through interview panelist testing, and you go through a number of different levels of interview. You go through polygraphs. And as they find out empirically who you are, meaning they can test your psychology, they can test your personality, then they actually have a better idea of what job position they want you to have. So at the end of all of that process, which takes anywhere from 9 to 18 months, that's when they give you what's known as a conditional offer of employment, a COE. And in that conditional offer, they say, we would like for you to be XYZ, to start on this day, to make this much money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you say yes to that conditional offer of employment, then you go into that category and then your training for that category starts. So I was brought on board just to be a person. Mm-hmm. As my personality testing went through, they identified me for National Clandestine Service, what was called NCS at the time. My conditional offer of employment came in as a GS-7, I think it was back then.
Which is pretty low pay.
Super low pay. Yeah. But I didn't care because I was like, oh, I'm going to get tuxedos and Lamborghinis and this is going to be awesome. Yeah. That's not how it works. Yeah. It's just low pay.
Yeah.
And then training starts from there. So then after they say, we think you'd be a good fit for this personality-wise and psychologically, then you have to prove yourself educationally and physically to be able to keep up with the training. And that was my whole path.
And that's at the farm.
That's at the farm.
Yeah. How long? Can you say how long are you there?
You know, it's funny. I was told that the length of farm is still classified, but I've seen it published a number of times. So I'll just say that it's less than a year and it's longer than 3 months.
Yeah.
It's inside that squishy zone. Yeah. And if you read it somewhere else, at least you didn't hear it from me.
Yeah. And as obviously whatever your job you end up doing, there's lots of follow-on training, right? You're continually training and getting.
Correct. And that's funny because we call it the farm. You would think that a farm is a place where animals go just until they're slaughtered.
Yeah.
Our farm, like you go back to the farm over and over again. You go back for advanced training, you go back for refresher training. It's really more of our central training hub than anything else.
Mm-hmm. How much of your actual job can you talk about what you actually did in the agency?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was what's known as a staff operations officer. Operations officers are all the people who handle the collection of foreign intelligence. And you've got various tasks that go into that. Sometimes you're meeting with sources, sometimes you're developing sources, sometimes you're handling reporting, sometimes you're handling like administrative or logistics. I started very much in that core collector role, collecting information from sources, aggregating information from multiple sources, submitting that to analysts to create synthesized analysis that goes to the president. That's where I started. And then I actually ended my career doing covert action with Air Branch, as I mentioned to you, with Special Activities Group, or Special Activities Division at the time. And I was also one of the agency's briefers for Congress and congressional staffers. So a big part of where I learned public speaking was speaking to hostile congressional reps who were asking questions that they weren't allowed to know the answer to.
Yeah, for those who are listening, many may know or may not know, in this CIA's paramilitary side is you have a ground branch, maritime branch, air branch, which is like, when I would imagine what I would want to do at the CIA, that's where that's where the action happens. And so to be at air branch, is a pretty prestigious accomplishment, and I'm sure you got to do a lot of great work there.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, you're totally right. There's a reason that we call it covert action, because it's where all the action happens, and it's all plausibly deniable by the president, right? It's a important, viable job. It's critical to national security, but it's different, very different than your traditional intelligence collection jobs, because your traditional intelligence collection is usually supposed to be void of action. Because if there's action happening, then you don't look like you're undercover anymore.
Right.
You don't look clandestine. You're not there in secret anymore. Once you start shooting, banging, or blowing up, people know you're there. So traditional clandestine operations are very much about getting in and getting out and getting the information you need without anybody ever knowing it happened.
Yeah, if there's action, then you probably did something wrong.
Correct.
Yeah. For the citizens of America listening right now, most people probably don't know what the CIA's role actually is the Central Intelligence Agency structured to only do operations OCONUS outside of continental United States? Or is there Central Intelligence Agency operations that are happening in the United States?
So it's a great question, and it's a huge misnomer for people, because so much of what we understand is shaped by media. So the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, is the central repository of intelligence analysis. That's where the central intelligence comes from. It means that all intelligence agencies, what we call the IC, the intelligence community, which includes all of DOD, NSA, FBI, NRO, NGA,
everything,
you name it, right? Even IRS has a counterintelligence arm that creates intelligence that gets filed into CIA archives. So at the center of this giant intelligence community is the Central Intelligence Agency, which was really only created in like the 1940s, I want to say, so that it could create a single brief that goes to the chief executive of the country, the president, and that is the president's daily brief. So all source information is centralized, synthesized, analyzed, and turned into a readable format that goes to the president every day with the president's daily brief. That's what CIA was built to do. Now,
he could take action off of that.
Yeah, and so he could make policy decisions off of that. Now, over time, what happened is CIA also expanded into other areas of utility because it became an agency of last resort, meaning when DOD couldn't do it, when NSA couldn't do it, when DIA couldn't do it, when FBI couldn't do any mission, CIA became that agency of last resort. So at that time,
which is why we call covert action the third option, right? You get diplomacy, military action, covert action is like
exactly. Yeah, that's the third option, the last option, right? That was traditionally how it was viewed. So it became this agency of last resort, which they then decided to split between a law enforcement element and a intelligence element. The law enforcement element of last resort went to FBI. Law enforcement means enforcing the laws of the land. So inside the continental United States, operations are governed by the FBI. Everywhere else in the world, it's the CIA, right? We're the agency of last resort outside OCONUS. Does that mean CIA only runs operations overseas? No, it means CIA only runs primacy overseas. If CIA runs an operation in the United States, it has to be in concert with FBI, which usually works in concert with local police and local law enforcement.